Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Murder, where I'll be talking about and reviewing an episode of Poirot, Murder, She Wrote, Diagnosis Murder, or Jonathan Creek. Today I'm looking at Poirot, Murder on the Orient Express, or as I like to call it, that time they should have taken the bus. We begin the episode with Poirot proper ranting off at this guy, Lieutenant Morris, calling him a liar. So he grabs a gun and shoots himself? What the fuck? Poirot mopes on a boat because Morris was actually innocent, while Toby Jones fluffs around with some money before being disturbed, so he pulls a gun but manages to defuse things with his words instead. Poirot spies on these two people in the street who try to stop this woman getting manhandled for having an affair, but she's dragged off and stoned, and what the hell am I watching? Poirot checks into this hotel, but a message summons him back to London and he asks to be booked on the Orient Express before witnessing Ratchett being protective of his suitcase. And when he learns the Orient Express is full, this guy Book says not to worry, he'll sort it out. The passengers all board, including Jessica Chastain, the governor from The Walking Dead, and that guy from Downton Abbey, as well as some woman who likes kissing her necklace. After some faff, Book robs a cabin off some poor bloke who is late, and this guy Hector is not happy about the news at all. Well, this is awkward. The train pulls away and we get all Snowpiercer for a minute, where Poirot and his new roomie struggle sharing a space together, but Antonio and Edward seem more civil about their sleeping arrangements. Ratchett complains to the steward that he wants service, like now, before harassing Mary in the hall, pointing out there's something wrong with her arm. So she stomps off, where Poirot checks up on her, and they discuss what happened to the woman in the street, which results in Mary face-planting the bathroom mirror. Greta asks Poirot what he does and then sods off immediately, and the steward goes to see Ratchett, who bribes him into spilling the tea about all the other passengers. Book invites Poirot to join him for breakfast the next day and introduces Dr. Constantine, as well as pointing out different passengers: Countess Andrenyi, Princess Dragomirov, and Hildegard Schmidt. Ooh, pretty! Ratchett approaches Poirot and wants to hire him to protect him because one of his many enemies could kill him before he reaches his destination, but Poirot turns him down. The train stops and Poirot gets off while he waits for his own room, where he lays out a rosary. I've never noticed Poirot's religion before, and he overhears Ratchett yelling about his apartment almost getting broken into. Oh, now Poirot is praying. And so is Ratchett. Has Poirot seriously been Catholic this whole time and I never noticed? A scream in the night wakes Poirot and he peekaboos into the hall, where Ratchett calls through the door that he's fine, so Poirot goes back to bed, only to be woken again when the train crashes. He peekaboos again to hear Mrs. Hubbard complain someone was in her compartment, but Michelle tells Poirot she's a bit nuts, so he goes back to sleep, only to be woken yet again by a rando woman. But I guess she doesn't warrant investigating. Whoa, that is a lot of snow. Book comes to bug Poirot, who is rather cranky, and he discovers Ratchett is super murdered. No surprise. But sure, get the doctor to check. Yep, he's dead alright, stabbed 15 times around the time Poirot heard the scream. Book wants Poirot to solve the crime and panders to his ego, so he reluctantly agrees, and establishes that the murderer could only be from this coach and they are still on board. Poirot corrects the doctor by pointing out there are only 12 stab wounds, and they're all a bit all over the place, some deep, some shallow, some left, some right, so he thinks that there were 2 killers, and discovers a gun in Ratchett's hand. Book rounds everyone up and tells them about the murder, asking them to stay put until further notice, while Poirot finds a monogrammed hanky and a burned piece of paper with a few letters on it. Poirot noses into Michelle's business, dead child, dead wife, before he recounts his movements last night. Ratchett screaming, Mrs. Hubbard complaining, some woman in the hall, and also he had transferred to this train car for this journey only. Edward is up next, who admits he didn't like Ratchett.
Put a sewer rat in a suit and he's still a sewer rat, he's just in a suit.
Says he was awake until 4 AM because of toothache and doesn't recognise the letters on the burned paper. Now it's Hector's turn, who was hired by Ratchett as a translator, but says he was dodgy and shows Poirot the threats Ratchett had gotten, figuring whoever sent them got to him in the night. Poirot thinks Ratchett was not his real name as the power goes out, and he is in fact Lanfranco Cassetti, who kidnapped a girl named Daisy Armstrong. But despite her parents paying the ransom, she was never returned to them because Cassetti murdered her. The news caused the mother to die in premature childbirth, and having been accused of being involved, the maid unalived herself, and while Cassetti was arrested, his mafia connections got him free again. Okay, let's hold it there. I know how this turns out and who the murderer is, but dead child, dead wife sound familiar? I would be on Michelle's case right the fuck away. Mrs. Hubbard bursts in claiming she knows who the murderer is. Book tells everyone they need to rummage through their luggage, and Hector announces Ratchett's true identity, worrying that he's going to be accused because his dad worked on the kidnapping case and yet he didn't recognize Cassetti. Mrs. Hubbard recounts how a man was stood over her in the night and escaped through the adjoining door to Cassetti's room, with Doc finding a button on the floor belonging to a conductor, who he reckons was an assassin, and was the mystery woman in the hall. But Poirot reminds him that there were two killers. Book thinks it's a mafia hit and names Foscarelli because he's Italian. Rude! While Poirot interviews Greta, who talks religion and thinks God probably struck Cassetti down in the night, which Book makes fun of and then mocks Princess What's-Her-Face's outfit before announcing he knows who the killer is. He runs his Foscarelli theory by Poirot, who shoots it down because he has an alibi, and then he chats to Princess Dragomirov, who says she couldn't sleep, so Hildegard stayed with her, and she admits she was the godmother of Daisy's mother, who had a younger sister, and says if she'd recognized Cassetti, she would have stabbed him herself. Foscarelli tries to convince Poirot he's not involved, but warns him not to get on the wrong side of the mafia, and then Poirot goes to speak to Hildegard, who says the hanky isn't the princess's, and acts real jumpy and contradicts herself when he asks her about cooking, before she too claims to have seen the murderer. She says the rando lady in the hall was actually a man, although her description of him isn't helpful. And then Poirot talks to the Count and Countess, who say they're not much help to him, but he does establish what hand the Countess writes with, and that the hanky isn't hers. Mary wants to know why she hasn't been questioned, so Poirot yells at her for being sus, causing John to jump to her defense and admit that they're lovers, but kept it on the down low because he's currently going through a divorce. That night, Poirot decides to go poking around in Hildegard's bags, where he finds the conductor's coat minus a button and a picture of her with the Armstrongs maid, before joining the passengers to keep warm, when Mrs. Hubbard presents him with the murder weapon she found in her belongings, and Hildegard freaks out. Poirot has had enough of this shit and says the snow screwed up the perfect crime, one which has two solutions. Either it was a mafia assassin who has now disappeared, or it was what really happened. The Countess, Helena, is the younger sister of the Armstrong matriarch. Hector's dad threw the Cassetti case for fear of mafia repercussions. Michelle's daughter was the Armstrongs' maid, who was the lover of Foscarelli. Greta was Daisy's nanny. Mary was her governess, who was attacked during the kidnapping. John and Edward served with Colonel Armstrong during the war. And Mrs. Hubbard is Daisy's famous grandmother in disguise.
12 people and 12 wounds in the body of Cassetti.
Poirot decides that the Countess didn't actually participate and the doctor was the 12th culprit, and the princess says they drugged Cassetti so he would be awake but couldn't move.
We needed him to know of his execution.
And after Hector broke his watch, he screamed, responded to Michelle, burned the note, and then they all took it in turns to stab him while the princess told him off and then delivered the final blow. The rando lady was Mary, and Poirot goes ballistic at everyone for taking matters into their own hands. Like, seriously, calm down, dude. You're surrounded by 12 murderers. If they don't kill you, the stress will. Princess Dragomirov asks Poirot to let her take the sole blame, but he refuses, and despite Book trying to defend them, Poirot tells him to lock them in the carriage, where John decides he's going to shoot them both. Mrs. Hubbard stops him, and Mary pep talks him, and later Mary brings Poirot tea, which he drinks. Dude, that could be poisoned! And she tries to justify what she and the others did. The police arrive, and the murderers await their fate as Poirot disembarks the train.
The name of the captain is
Janet Jackson.
Did he just say Janet Jackson?
Janet Jackson.
Poirot presents the conductor's coat to the police, and with it the story of the mafia assassin, allowing the 12 killers to go free. And as he walks away from the scene, he clutches his rosary and has a little cry. Right, this has got to be the most iconic and famous Poirot story, surely. I mean, they were all in on it. 12 people were the murderers. And that's not been done before, or since, as far as I'm aware. Except I distantly recall a CSI episode which borrowed this idea a bit. I unfortunately had the twist spoiled for me before I read the book, and I've not watched the Suchet version until now. So it's a different viewing experience knowing the outcome, as I was able to pick up on the hints and clues, as well as understand the behaviour of the characters before the crime had taken place. It's been decades since I read the books and years since I watched a significant amount of episodes of the show, but I just don't remember Poirot being religious, and yet it plays a big part in this story. I mean, it works story-wise, but it was a little jarring to me, seeing as it's not something I've noticed before. So let's take a look at the story itself, and it has both good and bad points. Everyone was the killer, all of them, except the Countess, which seemed to throw things off a bit. I love the idea of all of them being guilty, especially 12 of them, seeing as it mirrors 12 members of a jury, but they could have done with cutting out a character to make it only 12, Greta probably, and that would have made Ratchett unlucky number 13. Instead, they had an extra person who didn't participate but was happy to stand by while everyone got to murdering. I find it strange as well that a monogrammed hanky was left behind at the scene, and if memory serves in the book, also a pipe cleaner. With 12 people all in on it and all going into the room, I'm surprised no one spotted it or searched the scene to make sure nobody left anything incriminating behind. But regardless, how savage the princess was, both in her words and her stabbing, as well as her offering to take full blame for the crime so the others could go free, was some boss-ass moves, and seriously made her my favourite out of all the characters. Plus it makes me laugh to think that she was just wandering around with a bunch of money sewn into her clothes. You go, girl! The inciting incident that caused them all to come together is as good as any, loosely based on the Lindbergh case. And I love the scene with them all in the lounge car with Poirot revealing how each of them are connected to Daisy Armstrong as he realises that he's surrounded by murderers, and it's really chilling. I also love how fearless Poirot is. He's in a room full of killers and he still tells them all off for what they've done and plans to bring them to justice. He has no fucks to give. But it's also interesting to see him struggle with his own morality as he wavers from his absolute certainty to bring them to justice to considering and ultimately deciding to allow the killers to go free, even though it differs slightly in the book. If memory serves, Poirot didn't make the decision. He let the killers decide whether they would get away with their crime. It's pretty standard that the most unlikable person in the room gets murdered in these types of shows, but Murder on the Orient Express takes that to the extreme, with the victim being an actual monster. He kidnapped and murdered a child. So you actually empathise with the killers on this one, which makes the decision Poirot has to make all that more impactful. I think the problem is, they say that Poirot has an encyclopedic knowledge of the Cassetti case, but he didn't recognise him or anyone else related to the case, even though they were all together on the train. And my major gripe with this episode was Book was really annoying, to the point of distracting from the story. I always say with these feature-length Poirot episodes, there's a lot of unnecessary plot threads that go nowhere, and the episodes could have done with being shorter, but in this case, we could have done with a bit more time to get to know the characters in the first place. I was hella confused over who was who, what this person's name was, who they were rooming with, that I had to make lots of notes and have the IMDb cast list page open as I was watching the episode and keep referring to it because I was so confused about who was who. Nevertheless, while Death on the Nile will always be my favourite, Murder on the Orient Express will always be iconic. We have one body, not victim, body. Ratchett/Cassetti, who was revenge stabbed by a whole train car full of people for murdering Daisy Armstrong. So there you have it. That was Murder on the Orient Express. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really does mean a lot, or consider subscribing if you want more videos like this one. Alternatively, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. Thank you so much for watching, I'll speak to you soon, and keep an eye out for clues.